Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm above ground, so I have options, which means I am joyous.
Sounds good.
That's right. Give me liberty and keep me away from death. How are you today?
I'm good. Good. Just reading through the book again.
Uh, oh, again? Okay. So it's that good, huh?
Oh yeah, I just like to. It's interesting to me. That video we watched was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and by the way, I put that on Canvas.
Yeah, I looked at the YouTube, but it looked like it was from your afternoon class, not our class.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I use actually that video, if you're talking about the one with Dr. Lipton.
Yes.
Yeah, I use that one in all six classes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good start, especially for folks who are getting back into school or maybe coming out of high school, going into, college. It's a good way to get their brain sort of oriented to achievement and what could theoretically be a barrier.
Right.
Yeah, I really like the video. It's a good video.
Yes, it is. Very
Glad
good.
you watched it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything special going on or just ready for class?
Oh, just ready for class. I have a sociology class. It's what is it? Um, social problems.
Okay.
Very, very interesting. So the classes I took this semester are just very intriguing. So it's a lot of the things that are going on right now in society.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like this class and that class kind of goes, I don't know, together in a sense, like the psychological part of it.
I think it's absolutely perfect with what's going on.
Yes.
And whether it is whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's movement in white supremacist groups, whether it's the political feuds that are going on, absolutely all of it has an exact correlation with psychology and especially sociology and psychosocial behavior.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So my professor in that class, she was like, I believe that you're an idealist because I was raised completely different than the way that I view things now and the things that are going on in society. I'm like, everybody's equal, it doesn't matter. And she's like, I really think that you're an idealist. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna test that theory.
Yeah.
Went on
Well,
after our class on Wednesday and watched these videos and of George Floyd and all of this stuff, and I was appalled.
yeah.
I could not believe my eyes. Like I guess I've been blinded in a way from the society and the way that it is. So I sent her this big email like, I just can't believe the way things are right now. Like it just
Yeah.
I was
Well, well, generally, if it's not sensationalized, you don't see it. I mean, it has to be something that, unfortunately, the news medias, and that's all of them, they look for something that they can sensationalize, get people, ramped up. Because if I get you ramped up, now it's emotional. And if it's emotional, I can get the clashes. I mean, something as simple, and I'm not a big rap fan, even though I had an appreciation for Tupac and Biggie, those kind of folks. But, the reality is rap was rap. And but it escalated significantly by creating a East-West uh, conflict, East Coast rappers versus West Coast rappers,
right.
and it created such a fury that both of them ended up getting killed for absolutely no reason other than a useless conflict.
Right.
So yeah, it's amazing how the tenets of psychology, sociology, and even history can promote uh, conflict simply not by facts, but by presenting an issue that will get someone to questioning not even really their values, but other people's values that they want to associate with. And that's on every side of the coin. And I know it's two sides, but I'm talking all of the dollar bills. So you flip them all over, there's a different message, different story. And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in my communications class about fake news and propaganda and all of that.
Yeah.
I was watching it was the RNC. I just watched like a piece of it. It was the news coverage in the beginning, and it was on Fox News, and Fox News was saying that CNN and MSNBC was saying that Jacob Blake was an unarmed black man, and there's no truth to that. There was no like evidence, no proof, nothing. So I'm like, the media is partly causing all of this societal destruction.
Well, they're parts to blame, but I think, and when I say fake news or I hear fake news, any news is faked if it hasn't been researched for a factual base.
Right.
So Fox, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, any of them, if they haven't validated the research, if they haven't done a fact check to make sure that what they're saying has been proven, then it's not unlike what we were talking about with experiments. If I can't prove it statistically, then it is an opinion and an unfounded one. So to promote that, it crosses the boundary. Let's see, we're close to starting, but one of the best analogies for Black Lives Matter that I saw was, yes, all lives matter. There are no lives that don't matter. But the analogy was, if you're living in a neighborhood and all of your homes are assessed at the same value or very close, the fire department doesn't come to the ones that aren't burning. They come to the one that is.
Right.
And so if you have one house that's in more trouble than the other houses, you focus on that one house. It doesn't mean that the others don't have the same value, the same equity. It's simply that there's one that's burning that you need to focus on. And that was the analogy. I really liked it. I thought it was creative, but it was also created an image that people can relate to. So so you bring some of your sociology stuff into the class. I'd love to discuss it more as we go through some of the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting, and learning a lot from it. So
Good. All right. Well, good morning, everyone else. It's
Morning, Professor.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I mean, I am. If it was any better, I'd be triplets. Right now, I'm just twins.
Yeah, I got the Monday blues, so.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, every Monday I get the Monday blues. I feel a little bit down, but I'll be okay in an hour.
Okay. You know, one of the things is the practice that I do, and it actually works for anyone, or I believe it can work for anyone, but usually because Saturday and Sunday gives us a lot more flexibility and freedom than the other days. The tendency is to, again, cognitively look at Monday as a requirements day, where Saturday and Sunday are our fluent days, our freedom days. So when I get up on Monday mornings, I forcibly lift my knees. I walk, over to wash my face, take a shower, whatever, but I don't drag to it. I actually put energy into it, lift my legs and stuff. It actually refocuses my brain to be active and not to feel like, this is a day that I really don't want to enter. You're going to try for about 30 days, see what happens.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're actually, one thing good about being in Zoom is if it was back in Nova, I'd have to wake up early in the morning around 6 o'clock. And it's such a struggle to wake up early in the morning. But I just wake up like an hour or so before class. I feel a little relaxed. I just need to eat breakfast and I'm fine.
Yeah.
And it's good to have like psychology or like a class that's not like math or something that doesn't, that's enjoyable and fun to listen to.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope I'm part of
Yeah.
the fun to listen to part.
Yeah.
Okay, good. But yeah, remember everything and the stuff that we're talking about is how we condition ourselves. So even getting up, if and I would offer this because I used to do this with my daughter. Whenever she had friends that she was going to see, if there was something she really wanted to be involved in, I couldn't stop her from getting up. But if it wasn't something that she was interested in, she would stay in bed till 9 o'clock, right? So we've conditioned ourselves to what we find pleasure in and what we find painful. We avoid pain, but we're attracted to pleasure. So if you can redirect your thinking that getting up in the morning to learn something, to participate in something is actually pleasurable, your brain will allow you to wake up and start doing those leg lifts. So good, excellent. So that's the kind of stuff. But yeah, guys, bring that kind of stuff. Let's talk about that so we can actually apply it to your own lives. Where we ended on last Wednesday was going into correlation. So I didn't want to start here on last Wednesday because this one, it's not difficult or complex, but there are nuances that if I think we float through it too fast, could cause, I will say, a knowledge problem, a knowledge transfer problem. So looking at it, that's where we'll start today on understanding correlation. So before we get into this, on any of the other information that we talked about, are there any questions on research, terms, steps of the scientific model, any of those things? Are there any questions about any of the things that we talked about previously before we start in the new part?
No, sir, not at the moment.
Okay, so I'm going to allow you to be the spokesperson for everybody right now, so we're going to just jump into it. All right, so correlations. Oh, and let's see, yeah, we are recording. All right, so correlations. One of the big things to recognize, and at least to be aware of, is that is this statement: correlation is not causation. Okay, and I'll give you an example of that later on, but the big statement there is correlation is not causation. And the primary reason for that is we have relationships, or we see things that are impacted negatively or positively, not unlike some of the stuff Cody and I were just talking about, but there are things that happen simultaneously. And they could be in direct correlation, indirect correlation, or really have no correlation at all, but they are similar in actions over specific events. So as an example, well, let me ask this question. Do you think there's any relationship between crime rate and ice cream sales?
Sir,
No.
sorry to interrupt.
No.
Is this the beginning of chapter 1?
No, this is the middle of chapter 1.
Oh, okay, because I don't think we never started chapter 1, sir.
The previous slides we didn't go through on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Are you? You mean we didn't talk about scientific method or anything?
No,
No,
because
we
we had
No.
the first class canceled because
Oh,
of
Yeah.
the
that's right.
issues.
That's right. That's right. That's right. You guys are my special group. Okay. I apologize, guys. Sorry.
It's okay,
But-
sir.
No, thank you for bringing that to my attention, because I would have taken you guys and of course part of the exam would have had this stuff on it, and you would have, I'm sure, had some thoughts about me. All right, so we'll go back to here. All right, so back to critical thinking. And I think where we left off was at this point, if I'm not, because we talked about the lady in the slide, right? Right?
No, not really.
No,
have not.
we only made it to slide 2. I just checked the YouTube
Okay.
video that you uploaded.
That's good. So what I'm going to do is make my note for this class where we are, so that this will be the only time that I make a mistake on where we start. Okay, this is good. All right. Okay, so let's go here. And now, given this picture, and I'm going to blow it up a little bit so you can see it better. What strikes you about this billboard? Anything? Anything of interest? Anything spark your interest? Anything that you think stands out?
It seems like a product for something to do with body hygiene, probably.
Okay, that's interesting perspective.
It's kind of like because she doesn't appears that she don't have any clothes on, so like a sex sells type of thing.
Okay, also
Yeah.
a very good perspective.
I was gonna say she's trying to look sexy. There's sex appeal, but also like there may like she may be trying to like there may be something like she's staring at, or maybe like I don't know, maybe there's something in the background that we can't see or something.
Okay, actually, that's very good. Thanks, Joel. Because each of you are correct. I mean, each of you is correct. Sorry. So what you said is absolutely correct in all three instances. Yes, it's sexually intriguing and enticing. It is also set up as an advertisement marketing. And if we look at the dynamics of that billboard, all we're trying to do, or all the advertisers are trying to do, is invoke an emotional state with you. Because if I can get you emotionally connected to something, it is much more probable that you will purchase it based on that emotion. So, as Cody said, we don't know if she has any clothes on or not, but if someone is interested in a naked woman, then it's going to draw their attention to this billboard. Now, what do I do to add to that? If you look at it, Christmas sparkle. So, and down here, find your St. David. So it's a jewelry advertisement. But what they've done, if you'll notice Christmas, they've got the colors of Christmas, light blue background with the snowy base. And then all of the features for the young lady that's in it are darkened so that it contrasts with the background, but it also adds to the sparkle. Now, what happens generally, at least in the northern part of the country, during Christmas time? Well, let's say during winter. It snows, okay? So look, under the Christmas heading is a flurry of diamonds, not snow or jewels, right? So now you've got this idea associated with Christmas, snow, individual items, and each snowflake being a unique and separate entity from all other snowflakes. And of course, it goes to her fingers. And even if you look below, on each of her fingers are jewels. So it's associating not only the sex appeal, but it's also people's predilection toward Christmas and what Christmas means. And a statistical fact is that the most sales for jewelry happens during Christmas time. And it's an emotional association with, if I want to have the person that I care about or the person that I'm interested in have a higher probability to get naked for me, I should go and buy some jewelry. All of this stuff gets added in. And I know it may seem far-fetched, but I'll share this with you. Let me change the screen. And most of you guys, if not all of you, are too young to remember Playboy magazine. But in Playboy magazine, what they used to do was they would put a glass of alcohol, and then of course in the alcohol they would put ice cubes, and they would put ice cubes in the glass, and unbeknownst to most people, there would be something so jagged that was in the ice cubes. And in those ice cubes, though, strategically placed would be, where am I? My drawing again. Would be the letters like that. So simply chipping the ice cubes in a special way, a certain way, would spell out the letters sex. So now people looking at the advertisement for alcohol would subliminally, not consciously, because the ice cubes, they couldn't do it openly or people would know that they were trying to condition them or influence them, but they would chip them in a way that the brain subconsciously would make out the letters S-E-X. So now sex was associated with alcohol. Alcohol sales, of course, went up. Clubs had much more participation, simply on the premise because people associated alcohol with sex and believed that the two were destined to exist within the same space. And we'll talk about subliminal programming later on, but that was the idea. The premise was, if I can get your subconscious to be activated for a certain influence, then I could condition you and in some instances control your response and behaviors. And that's what was happening. So that's exactly what they were doing here. And I mean, I saw there was a young lady who doesn't like a ruling that's with the LPGA, the Ladies Professional Golf Association. But her picture on the front of it, and it's on Google if you just open up Google Chrome, one of the first advertisements is this young lady standing there with a dress that literally does not go much lower than her butt cheek. And she's probably a size 36 or 38 with a 21-inch waist. It has absolutely nothing to do with golf, but has a 80% following because most people see her picture and then they open it up because they want to see her picture. Then, of course, they read about the golf. And in Gentleman's Quarterly, which is a magazine that my son subscribes to, the majority of those are about clothes, but the majority of the people who are modeling are semi-nude. So we create these images and structures so that it entices us and even subconsciously activates our emotional zones so that we respond more positively. And of course, before our brain can reconsider it, we've already made the purchase. And that's all that's happening here. So when we look at the study, the scientific study of behavior and mental processes, that's exactly why we're doing it. Because there are folks who will manipulate this and they will use verbal communication, nonverbal behaviors, thoughts, emotions, all of those things to activate certain areas of the brain that will cause you to respond more positively to one thing than another. And it can be negative or positive. So the way that that happens, though, is, of course, we evaluate whether or not someone has the ability to evaluate or to use critical thinking or not. The less likely someone is to do critical thinking, the more likely they are to be manipulated. And I'll show you a video later today before we finish today that highlights that. And it's simply in redirection and how our conscious is manipulated by others to cause a particular response or outcome. So if we look at this definition, process of objectively evaluating, comparing, analyzing, and synthesizing information. How do you evaluate something? What must exist in order for you to evaluate something?
What do you mean by evaluate?
Assess.
Okay.
Like
How do you? I'm sorry.
Visuals.
Okay, but I can. What will allow me, though, visually or or physically, to evaluate something? What must exist?
Critical thinking.
I'm sorry.
Critical thinking, or
sorry, you cannot use the definition in your answer.
Your psyche, like your
Oh,
psychology.
you're getting very close. Oh, say that again.
Your psychology.
Oh no, you said another word.
Psyche.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I heard, I'm sorry, because I was speaking when you were saying the second word. I thought I heard something else.
Your subconscious, probably.
Ooh, not the subconscious, but you guys are so close, so close. So what is in your subconscious? What's in your psyche?
Uh,
You're conscious? Conscious?
Think of the circle of psychology.
brain. I don't know.
Well, brain elements, but
Yeah.
how do you take what you have available to you to make a decision? What must you use?
Logic.
Ooh, logic is based on this exact same thing. Okay, I'll give it to you guys. It's knowledge, right? You have to know one of two conditions. You either have to know what something is, or you have to know what something isn't, right? In order to evaluate something, I must first at least know what it's supposed to represent. Because I can't evaluate this bottle unless I know what a bottle is. If I don't know what it is, I can't evaluate it. And I can evaluate it because I know what a bottle is, which means I also know or have an idea of what a bottle isn't. So I wouldn't say that this is a bottle because I know what a bottle is, right? And so to evaluate something, I must first have knowledge of what its characteristics are and or what is representative of that particular item. And we'll talk about schemas later. But so by knowing what it is, I can do a comparison. And what am I comparing? What am I comparing? Think about what I just said.
Two objects.
Yeah, two objects, but what about the objects? Yes, Henry, but what about the objects?
They're different.
They're different. So that means if I know what it is, then I compare it to something that isn't, right? Because if they're both the same, there's no comparison. They are the same. But if I'm going to compare something, I'm looking for a difference. So critical thinking says, first, do I have the knowledge to know what it is? And then do I compare it to something that it isn't? And based on those characteristics, I can analyze that and then taking the information that I have, make a decision, right? I can have a particular behavior. For instance, I mean, if I say a BMW and I say a Nissan Altima, they're both cars, right? They're both cars fundamentally, but when I compare them, I compare the characteristic difference to say, is this more expensive car of value, or is the less expensive car of value? So I analyze it based on the characteristics and the things associated with those two things. Even though they're foundationally the same, they are different in different aspects. I take all of that information, and then based on having all of that information, synthesis simply means I take all of it in order to make a decision. So critical thinking involves all of those steps. First, you have to have knowledge with which to evaluate, know what it is and what it isn't in order to compare, analyze based on the characteristics you have available there, consolidate that information, synthesize it in order to make a decision. And that's really what critical thinking is. Now, again, as I said before, if someone does not have the ability, if you don't have knowledge of, think of the number of times when someone has asked you a question and you really didn't have the information or really know what they were talking about, but you didn't want to be seen as if you weren't up on the latest, or you didn't want to be seen as less intelligent than that person, and you will automatically say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, go ahead. Right? That's the absence of critical thinking. But critical thinking means that if you have knowledge of, then you can make a comparison and make a judgment about it. So as we continue to look at that, like I said, it's more independent thinking, better decision making, and more effective problem solving, right? Because again, you can't solve a problem if you don't have the information available with which to analyze the causes of the problem. Okay, So pseudopsychologies, and this one is pretty simple, right? We'll talk about statistical significance later on, but right now, the idea is simply that there is either I will say, a true psychology or a false psychology. Now, it doesn't mean that psychic readings can't somehow be right. It doesn't mean that mediums or palm readers or astrological charts aren't sometimes right. The problem is we don't know from time to time, event to event, whether or not they're going to be right. So psychology is based on experimentation, and ideally 90% of the time, 90% or better, the conditions that I set up in the experiment give me the same result. So for instance, the Pepsi Coca-Cola challenge, if I put 2 cups there and put Pepsi in one and Coca-Cola in the other, then 90% of the time people are going to choose one or the other for a particular reason. So I can run that experiment multiple times, and ideally I will get a similar result. It doesn't have to be the same, just very similar. With a pseudopsychology, there is no way to prove that you will get the same outcome more times than if it was simply by chance or luck. And that's the reason they're considered pseudopsychologies. So again, the idea is that 90% or more of the time, I will get the same result if I set up the same conditions. With psychic readings, mediums, palm readers, astrology, graphology, you as a single person, as an individual, could do it multiple times, and there's very little research that will support you will get the same reading each time. And that's simply why it's called a pseudopsychology. It is not real, a false psychology. Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning, when all of this stuff started. Now, at the beginning, psychology was not considered a valid science, and legitimately so, because we didn't have fMRI or MRIs or neurological scans. The technology didn't support it. So really the only way that you could try to explain someone's behavior was based on what that person shared with you. And that's why the first field of study was structuralism. And even as today, we can't read somebody's mind. So since we can't read their mind, the only way or the best way that we can get an idea of what someone's feeling and why they're behaving the way that they are is by them telling us. And that's why the structure of mental life, by identifying the elements of the conscious experience. Well, the conscious experience is what you share with someone else. So subconscious is held within an internal schema. The conscious is what we allow others to see. Well, the primary method was the use of introspection. Introspection is simply an individual explaining their own thoughts and behavior. So why do I do certain things? Why do I think a certain way? Why do I feel a certain way? So introspection is having the person reveal his or her feelings to someone else. Well, the problem with that still is, and even today, we can't read somebody's mind, so we have to trust that whatever someone is telling us is true. And if they're lying to us without there being micro expressions of some nonverbal behaviors, it may be next to impossible to figure out that they actually are lying. So structuralism had no scientific basis. You couldn't experiment to prove certain areas of the brain were causing certain behaviors or thoughts. So it sort of went by the wayside and was replaced with functionalism. And functionalism, the difference was, well, now since we're considering conscious experiences, what are the behaviors associated with those experiences So at least we can explain or hope to explain what triggers cause those particular behaviors. So sought to identify the functions of experience and how it helps us adapt to our surroundings. So for instance, why do some people experience anger in a particular event when others don't? What value does it serve? Meaning, some people are conditioned to be angry. A child, when he or she was younger, that was allowed to throw tantrums. And as a result of those tantrums, he or she was given what they wanted to diminish the tantrum, has been conditioned toward using that type of behavior to get what he or she wants. So even in relationships, when they feel like they are not being respected or acknowledged, that person is quicker to get angry or to yell or to, do whatever else. But functionalism says, well, since we can't look inside the brain, let's look at the behavior associated with the thoughts. And then maybe we can figure out what those triggers are that are causing the behavior. If we figure out the behavior, then associatively, we can place thoughts and feelings in alignment. So that was the idea. And so functionalism is pretty much still here, because as we look at humanistic psychology, social psychology, and behavioral psychology, we're still looking at the interaction between individuals. Now, the psychoanalytic model was the first field of psychology that was considered legitimate. And that was fathered by Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was a psychiatrist. And so if you know the difference between psychology and psychiatry, psychologists and psychiatrists look for the thought behaviors that drive particular behaviors and events and feelings. However, psychiatrists are medically approved, so they look at the chemistry of the body and can prescribe drugs, prescription drugs, to affect change in thoughts. Psychologists can't. All right, but the psychoanalytic model was first fathered by Sigmund Freud, and effectively he said that the majority of our actions, our developmental problems, our issues, even as teenagers and adults, are as a result of unconscious processes, meaning there are things beyond our control. There are unresolved conflicts that we either have not addressed or we have an inability to address. But because they exist, they can cause particular behaviors. Timothy McVeigh, Ted Bundy, all of those folks had underlying issues that they didn't share openly. And because they considered these issues prevalent, at least critical to them, the unresolved conflict, the unresolved solution to their issues ultimately manifested itself into violent behavior. And for Ted Bundy, it was not disclosed until much later that his mother was significantly authoritarian and even abusive. And he never felt like he could be a real man around women. And so his unresolved conflict was he needed to take control, but he didn't know how to. So he created this persona where he was this highly attractive, highly intelligent, a professional that women were automatically attracted to. But because he still had the unresolved conflict, he didn't know how to balance his emotions. And generally, to resolve the conflict, it resulted in murder. Right? And they aren't the only examples, but that's the idea. So Freud said, look, in order to help people get beyond their issues, then there needs to be ways that we can get people to disclose what those conflicts are, what those hidden feelings, emotions, desires, urges, if we can get them to disclose those, then we can work on what might be the trigger for causing those to happen.
Yeah.
So that was, yes, go right ahead.
Do you think there's such thing as just evil? Just like
No.
straight out evil?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
I'm curious.
Well, the reason I say that, because I don't think evil exists as an entity. I think evil,
Okay.
well, let me say that differently. I don't think evil as an entity is embedded genetically. I think evil
Yeah.
comes from external views and perspectives that promote certain behavior, but all of it, as I said before, every aspect of life is toward experiencing balance. And the way that we achieve balance is through satisfying our needs. And so if someone does not have his or her needs satisfied, then I think evil can exist because they don't see a positive way of achieving needs satisfaction. And so in order for them to achieve that level of balance, they have to create imbalance in others.
Okay.
So would that be considered the conscious or the unconscious?
That's the unconscious. The
The
unconscious is, I'll say it this way, and I'll use biology a little, but the unconscious is the fertile soil. And that's where the seeds germinate. The conscious is when the plant breaks through the ground, right? Because unconscious, we have no view of. I can't even now tell you what you're thinking. I can make conjecture because there are micro expressions that you have that I can reasonably assess or analyze and say that based on that particular expression, it generally means this is what you're thinking. Telling the truth, telling a lie, something like that. But once it becomes conscious, you've now shown others what that looks like, or you've shared it verbally. So now I can have a response to that because now I know how it's manifested itself. Yeah. So did that help? And it didn't have to be a right answer, but as long as it helped, then I'm good.
It did.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so we're going to look at, there are 7, but we're probably going to look at 5 more than we will the others, but we'll go through each of these and at least talk about what they mean. Now, let's go back just a little bit. So I talked about psychoanalytic. Psychoanalytic and psychodynamic are 80% the same, meaning that they both deal with the unconscious, the subconscious. However, the difference between the two is psychoanalytic says that it is individually based. So you as an individual have these unresolved conflicts, unconscious dynamics, past experiences, urges, and other things that you're unwilling to share with the outside world. Psychodynamic, the 20% that is different, says that we are influenced by our experiences, that the environment and the culture has an influence on our thoughts, even those unresolved. So let's look at this as an example. Let's say that someone is bullied. So subconsciously or unconsciously, that person may resolve that he or she is so different that people just automatically don't like them. They behave differently, they act differently, they do all of these things. And so they start to internalize what it is that they think is wrong with them. Psychodynamic says that may still exist. However, if I'm in an open environment, then rather than blaming myself for being bullied, I look at the environment and the way people are treating me that also influences my response. And one of the best examples, and it's not a good one, but as an example, it's one of the best one, is the Columbine High School shooting. The kids who were part of the trench coat mafia or whatever the group was, had indicated that they had been bullied for a number of years by a lot of the athletes, and then people who responded positively to the athletes, they saw as people who conspired to bully them. So when they went into the school and started killing people, that was an overt expression of their subconscious, those unresolved conflicts. Right? So both can exist, but once it becomes psychodynamic, we apply it to the environment. Behavioral is also individualistic in that when we think first of behavioral psychology, it's how the person interacts with those around them. Yes, Tenzin.
So is the difference between psychodynamic and psychoanalytic that psychodynamic, you're aware of the internal conflicts that you have, and whereas psychoanalytics, you aren't?
No, that's not the difference, because with psychodynamic or psychoanalytic, you can have those things that you are aware of and those things that you've repressed. So that can exist in either. The difference is psychodynamic involves your outside world, the external environment, and how it also either perpetuates or advances those feelings or changes those feelings.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. I'll give you this other example, and hopefully this will help. There's a story, and I haven't researched it, so I don't know if it's valid, but it's a great story. That this one person who was getting ready to graduate high school had cleaned out her locker. And I mean, literally everything, all of her books, everything that she had in her locker. And she was walking home and bumped into one of the other students. Well, usually she felt like she was absolutely ignored. She was invisible to everybody else in the school. And this person bent down, helped her pick up her books, and then offered, since they lived close, offered to carry them home for her. Right? So at the graduation, it turns out this young lady, according to the story, was the magna cum laude. She was the highest scoring per grade in her class. So she was going to be the speaker at the graduation. And when she spoke, she said, I felt like my life was over. I didn't feel like I had any friends. I don't think anybody cared for me, and I thought I was invisible. She said, so I was headed home to commit suicide. But this person stopped, helped pick up my books, talked to me, and she said, as a result of that one interaction, that one person made me feel like I had value. So the psychoanalytic would have been all of the things that she was aware of and feeling, but she repressed them and kept them within. The psychodynamic is that she still had those feelings, but now interacted with someone in the environment that helped change her thinking. All right. Did that help, Tenzin?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So humanistic is also introspective. Humanistic is about the person. How do we help the person gain a level of self-confidence, self-awareness? We'll talk about self-actualization later. But the idea is that people have value. Everyone has value. And Cody, even going back to what you asked previously about does evil, automatically exist? The idea from a humanistic perspective is that everyone is born good. And then as a result of the culture and environment, we introduce them to the crazy stuff. And then depending on how we see that, we manifest it either as still trustworthy, good, honorable, or we go to the other side of the coin. But humanistic is about the person and helping self-confidence, self-awareness, self-esteem. Cognitive is what are the ways, and we'll look at this in chapter 2, but what are the ways that we actually think? How does our brain manipulate signals that allow us to construct thought and then, of course, drive behavior? So simply how we think. Hold on, I think there's a question. Let's see. Oh, it's not that I think that everyone is born good, even though I do, because I think everyone is genetically predisposed. And so the idea is that, not unlike the 3 boxes I showed you guys, at the very beginning, we know, the only thing we know, actually we know nothing. Everything that could be considered knowledge is genetically predisposed, right? Because our DNA creates us, but it is only the blueprint for who we are. Our brains don't mature, as I said before. You don't have a conscious memory until the age of 3. Women's prefrontal cortex doesn't mature until 23 and men until 25 on average. So at birth, there is no external view of the world. Everything is internal. So unless there is something genetically predisposed that causes us to be evil, I believe every child is born innocent and then is introduced to an environment that gives them some type of conditioning toward being good, bad, or otherwise.
Sir,
Yeah.
would you say this sort of ties into like existentialism and determinism?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
So-
choice. Yeah, go ahead.
You can
Go
go.
ahead. No, I was just saying because, I mean, even determinism is not an exact science, right? Because determinism presupposes that we have choices, and then based on those choices that we make, we go down a particular path or the other, and that those paths are already determined. However, we have a choice on which one we take. Right? So even there, that's as a result of an external environment that has created a path. And since there are always at least 2 paths, we have a choice on which one we go down. So even then, we are born into something before we make a choice, because we don't have a choice about being born. Once you're born, then choices start. Everything else is already predetermined. Your genetics as a result of the 46 chromosomes that you have from mom and dad. And someone else had something.
So, is psychology just based on the fact that everyone is born good? Like the purpose of this class is to have that idea, that assumption, or I know it's a big question, but I'm trying to.
No, that would be perfect if it were true. But psychology, psychology isn't. There's a premise that people are born good, but psychology references the fact that people don't necessarily stay good. Right? Psychology is about the mental and behavioral interactions that we have in our culture, our environment, and with others. So it's the study of behavior, good or bad, but ideally we're trying to understand why one chooses a particular path versus choosing another. And only those who are humanistic and cognitive and even evolutionary believe ultimately that we start out good. One theorist, I think it was John Locke, says that children are born innocent. Right? He doesn't say good. It said they're born innocent.
Yeah.
And because they're born innocent, they are then influenced by the environment once they are born. And there's also something called tabula rasa, and it means a blank tablet. And so some psychologists believe, and even biologists believe, that after genetics, a child's knowledge, because the prefrontal cortex is not yet developed, is a blank slate, but it is developed as a result of experiences and interactions. So it is blank and it then is written on. And if you remember the video that I showed with Dr. Bruce Lipton, he said, the Jesuit said, give me a child through 7 and I will show you the man. Well, the idea was that because they don't have knowledge during the first 7 years, you get to write what that will be. And then they, of course, are receptive to that, and even if they aren't, they are written, their slate is written on, and that causes them to become the person that they will become. So that's the idea. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and then the last 3, the last three that we will focus on. One, of course, excuse me, is biological, because of course, and this lends itself to neuroscience and neurobiology, neuropsychology, all of those fields, because we understand that the brain is responsive to sensory information, and because the biology, not only of our brain, but the other parts of our body interlock, they actually relate to each other. And for instance, if you are sad, biologically, your brain creates hormones that will support your sadness. If you're happy, then the brain will support hormones and chemicals that promote happiness. And you're all familiar, excuse me, you're all familiar with drugs, and even in the dentist's office, when you have laughing gas, right? We can create instances of happiness or sadness or whatever. And then evolutionary, natural selection, adaptation, reproduction. So there is a belief, and is research validated, that in some instances, what we try to do is create our adaptive style. If our environments change, if our cultures change, and culture becomes huge in how we relate to others. In some countries, women aren't allowed to go to school. In some countries, there are prearranged marriages. I'm not saying good or bad, but based on that culture, that becomes the way that we adapt, and that becomes what drives our thought and influences our thoughts. And then, of course, sociocultural. What is the influence of our outside world that causes us to behave a certain way or believe certain thing, and even do certain things that may go against society or against our beliefs? Yes, Cody.
I did have a reading, and it said that I think it was the 1800s that physicians did not want women to go to school because they were afraid that it was going to affect the reproductive systems.
Yeah.
Have you heard that? I read it in my sociology.
No, but I've heard some other things that are just as absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as absurd. And remember again, and there's a correlation. It's not the same, but if you had someone who had not been trained medically, according to the 16, 17, 1800s, but could heal people, then obviously they were a part of the devil, they were evil, and they had to be burned at the stake. Right. So the absence of knowledge also created stupidity. Right. Yeah. So interesting. And I'll ask, do you guys know that in the 1920s and probably the 30s, there was a particular prescription that doctors wrote for pregnant women to keep them calm? What do you think it was?
But could you maybe repeat the question?
Yeah. In the 1900s, there was and even the 1800s, late 1800s, there was a prescription that doctors gave to pregnant women to keep them calm during their pregnancy.
Would it be like a morphine or like Valium or something?
Okay.
No, ma'am. It was cigarettes.
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 Oh my.
So now, given what we know about cigarettes, right, we know that that was absolutely wrong. But in the absence of information, they thought nicotine was something that would actually cause a woman to be more calm during her pregnancy. With no regard, or I shouldn't say with no regard, but they didn't have they didn't have the technology to understand the problem with nicotine on a fetus, right? So again, things way back then were so absurd because they didn't have the technology or instrumentation to be able to figure out what really the results were. Yeah, so I can believe that. I can absolutely believe that.
Professor, just watch 50 years from now or a decade from now, they'll say, oh, things from back then in 2020 was so obscure.
Yeah, they will. I mean, in the 1980s, I mean, cell phones, guys, were as big as your laptops. So, you know, but nobody understood microwave technology well enough to say that, oh, it also can cause cancer in the brain, right? So they've done a lot of studies now to get past that. And actually, that's one of the things we'll talk about and how we research and improve things related to psychology and biology and medicine and all of those things. But these are the 7 guys that we talked about. So I'm going to go further and start looking at research. So once we get an idea, oh, by the way, I'm not going to go over all of these fields of psychology, but if anyone is interested in a particular field, I'm happy to have a discussion with you. I have either worked in or around all of these fields, I believe, except for sports psychology. So if you're interested in any of those, and my PhD is in industrial organizational psychology. So if you're interested in that, we can definitely have a conversation about that. Okay, so how do we figure out what's going on? And again, so that it's not a pseudo-psychology, but a valid scientific approach to thinking, behavior, and emotion. Well, 2 of the primary ways, one is going to be basic research. And basic research simply says, I have existing research. They've done experiments. However, maybe we need to redo them to see if there's any changes. And one of the perfect examples was exactly what I shared with you about cigarettes, right? Research was done and said, oh yeah, nicotine's okay. You know, give that to a pregnant woman and she should go through her pregnancy all calm. Well, research to advance scientific knowledge says, well, we know it's there, but let's look at it and check it again. Let's look at current conditions and see if those conditions have changed what the outcome would be related to that research. Typically conducted in a university or research laboratory because they are setting up the conditions, and what they want to do is check those conditions to see if it gets the same results or different results a number of times. And again, as I said before, more than 90%, so that they can say if it happens more than 90% of the time, it's probably as a result of the conditions and not a result of luck or chance. And then there's applied research. Some things we just don't know. For instance, when cellular telephones. So with the idea of cellular telephones, well, prior to 1994, Bluetooth and all of those things didn't exist. So since they didn't exist physically, there was no research to look back on to determine if there was something that was valid, invalid, or needed to be redone. Because it was a real world issue, now we can look at the technology and start the research. Because whether we like it or not, social media and cell phone usage is more addictive than cocaine. And most of you, I would be willing to bet, this morning when you woke up, the very first thing you did was reach for your cell phone to see what was going on. So it actually has become an addiction. And unfortunately, social media just as well, and when I say unfortunate, it's not that it's bad, but it's just that we're so used to separating ourselves from personal interaction. And now with COVID, it's even advanced, that we rely on words that haven't necessarily been researched or validated. If somebody says it now, and everybody has a right to say whatever they want, yeah, no matter how stupid it is, but people who don't look for research will automatically say, oh, well, oh, that's real, that's happening, oh my goodness. And that's the problem. So applied research works on those things that haven't. Let's see, things would, and check your phone. Okay, so there are different types of research. Now this is ergonomic research, right? So how do we do things that promote interaction in our activities? So something as simple as this range. Now, these 2 levers are one on top of the other. But does that mean the one on the top is this one because it's the closest to that one? Or because this one's on the top, is it that one? Well, for those ranges now, when it's not in use or it reaches a certain temperature, it goes black. Well, I think you might want to know which one of those you're getting ready to touch or interact with. So something as simple as offsetting the dials created a less probability that someone was going to do something or knew which one they were turning off or turning on. Steering wheels in the 60s were as large as a desktop monitor, and you couldn't see any of the instrument panels, so you didn't know if you were running out of gas. Matter of fact, it would have been great to do research back in the 60s and 50s, because a lot of people ran out of gas, not because they didn't have, because gas was only, what, 10 cents a gallon, but it was because they didn't see the instrument panel that it was going empty. But now your car will even tell you you're close to empty and running out of gas. So applied things that didn't exist before, but now as a result of technology, we can increase those things. A couple of things, no matter what kind of research it is, it has to follow these 6 steps, always, these 6 steps. First is the question and literature review. So the question simply is twofold. Why am I doing it? And what is it good for? So the question is, am I interested in something, and what is that I'm interested in, and will it add value? Or is it just something that needs to be researched to determine if there's value? But of course, if I do a literature review, and these are, as you can see in the same bubble, literature review says, oh, there's already information that exists on that. If I was doing a study on tobacco or vaping, there's a lot of literature that talks about the effects of smoking. So instead of starting from scratch or ground to zero, I can look to see where it's a better place to start using existing information. So first I ask the question. And then if I'm satisfied with my starting point, then I do a testable hypothesis. I'm going to go to the next slide. We'll come back to this one, but just so I can talk through that. So a hypothesis is this. It's a tentative, meaning that I don't know the answer, but I'm going to say that one is true until I can prove that it isn't. And it has to be testable, meaning I have to set up conditions that will allow me to determine whether it's true or not. So a tentative and testable explanation about the relationship between 2 or more variables. So it has to be 2 or more. It has to be one thing versus another. Well, let's say with regard to another. So it's either going to be less than, greater than, or equal to. Or, I'm sorry, could be not equal to. So that's a hypothesis. So you simply make a statement of what you believe to be true, and then you test it. So I may say women in psychology 200 classes tend to score higher than men in psychology 200 classes. Now, I don't know that that's true. It's simply a statement that I can test and do an experiment to see if it's true or not. So that's a hypothesis. The operation of the definition simply is, well, now that I know what it is I want to study and I've got the variables that I want to look at, how am I going to do it? So that's where this step comes in, research design. So my hypothesis being that women score higher than men in psychology 200 classes. Now I'll design the experiment. What might be my design? You'll see in a little bit, because you'll be given tests.
Using multiple, like your different classes and scores.
Yep. So I'll give tests in all of the classes, and then I'll collect the scores. And the analysis will be to compare the scores of women versus men. And the outcome is going to be that either women do score higher, which means my hypothesis was true, or women don't score higher, which means my hypothesis was null. Null meaning that it is false or not true. Or I find that there's no significant difference between men and women's scores in Psych 200. But once I have that outcome, then I can publish it and say that women do score based on my population, do score higher, don't score higher, or they're equal or not equal to. Because it could be the opposite, that men score higher, but that's not my hypothesis. So you're testing the statement. And then the theory comes out of that. Either I advance the theory based on the new information, or if it's significant enough, it becomes a new theory. But those are the 6 steps, and they must be done in order to create a new theory. So the statistical significance part is this. Is it, if I set up the conditions, did I just look up and get the outcome that I wanted? Or was it as a result, literally, of the conditions that I set up? So statistical significance can be as low as 90%, but ideally it is 95, 97, or 99%. So that says that if I do an experiment 1,000 times, then 950 times, I got the results as a result of the conditions that I set up. And the other 5% could be per chance. 97%, 970 times, and 99%, 990 times out of 1,000, I get the results, the same results as a result of the conditions. If it's less than 90%, then it is not considered statistically significant, because it means that a lot of the outcomes could be simply as a result of chance. Yeah, Cody.
Okay, question. So in the cycle, where would you consider the diagnosis of SIDS?
Of
Like
which?
Of SIDS, like the sudden infant death syndrome? Because there's not really any scientific evidence of that.
Well, and so we would still go with step 1, right? So let's take that as an example. So the question would be, why isn't there enough research? Why isn't there enough data to eliminate or impact the existence of sudden infant death syndrome, right? And then I would look at the literature that's already been created, or any studies, and they don't have to be, they don't have to have a solution, but I can look to see what already exists. And so my statement, my testable hypothesis may be that children in the first 3 months of birth are more likely to experience SIDS than those past 3 months, right? So again, I don't know that that's true, but that's what I want to study. Is the first 3 months the most critical for doing something that will lessen the probability of SIDS? And so that's my hypothesis. So then I'll design that. And so maybe I will ask for a large number of volunteers of brand new moms and ask them if they would participate in the study. And so my design is to take data over the first 3 months and to see if the occurrence of SIDS is within that period or after. But that's simply a probably observation and or checking in with the moms and dads or the families regularly. So the data collection is going to be over that 3-month period for those families, and then collecting, did the child sleep on his or her stomach? Did they sleep on their side? Did they have pillows that they used? Did they not use pillows? Did they have cloth blankets, or did they have another material? So I can come up with all of these things that might lend to a child not waking up. And then after I've analyzed all of that data, I could then say, well, for those instances, and it's always going to be unfortunate, but those instances where SIDS did occur, there was the evidence of, and I'm making it up, but a cloth or some kind of knitted blanket. And so maybe that lends itself to that happening. Pillows that were not sturdy, but allowed the head to compress into the pillow. And so I could look at the outcome of those things based on the analysis and publish that data and say, even though it's not 100%, there's a high probability that these things can lead to SIDS. And so then my theory would be based on those outcomes. Okay, so that help? Okay. And so very quickly, because we have this one slide, I think there's one slide left. No. We've got these and then we'll be done because we'll start correlations on Wednesday. But where are we? What time do we finish?
Now,
Oh, now?
10:55.
Good answer. Okay. All right. So what we will do then is we will start here on Wednesday, and we'll still get through the rest of the chapter. But I'll align this with what we've talked about today, and then we'll get into correlations for Wednesday. But any final questions, guys? Sorry for taking you a few minutes over.
I thought we had 55. I might be wrong.
Oh, it's 10:55?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, it's
So
10:55.
okay, so let's see. So I've got 10 minutes or 9 minutes. I can finish this so that we start at the same place as the others on Wednesday. Okay, so in a nutshell, I mean, this is what we're trying to achieve by doing research. One, what is simply whatever your statement is, whatever you're trying to study, right? So for instance, my hypothesis may be that boys are more aggressive than girls. Again, I don't know that that's true. It's simply a tentative statement. And it's a tentative prediction that it is true. But once I do the experiment, I'll find out why. And so why does it matter? Because if there are certain things that lead to those aggressive behaviors, the more that I understand that, then ideally, the more that I can bring about change by promoting things that will stop the aggressive behavior. And so my prediction is simply that boys are more aggressive. But when does this happen? What are the conditions that cause that to be true? And that's the idea. So we're looking to do those particular 4 things. Well, as we talked about with research, there are 4 primary ways of looking at research. The most prevalent is descriptive. And that simply means that what is a description? So usually a description is either going to be in written form or observation. And notice, without manipulating the variables. Because if I manipulate the variables, then that changes the experiment each time. If I want to look for the statistical significance, then I want the conditions to be the same so that I can say with great certainty that the outcome is as a result of the same conditions. So I don't manipulate the variable. So one type of descriptive research is naturalistic observation. If you're familiar or not familiar with Jane Goodall is the foremost expert on apes and gorillas because she didn't go to a zoo and study their behavior. She went into the jungle for 2 years and lived in the jungle. So she lived in the jungle and watched gorilla interaction, ape interaction. So it's observation and then recording that behavior and processes associated with the natural state. If I, for instance, wanted to look at a foster home, then I would go into the foster home because that's the natural environment so that I could see specifically what is happening in that environment. Surveys, not unlike under the political climate that we're in, surveys, just trying to get a large sample of people, ideally more than 50 people, that I can ask questions to get a sense of attitudes toward a particular topic or issue. Now, case study is more specific in that it is looking for a specific condition that either one individual has or a number of individuals, but they all have the same condition. So if you got migraines from eating peanuts, then if that was the issue that you reported to me, then I would want to study your or the impact of peanuts to you. So I would study you specifically as a single individual. Or if I found that there's a group of people who have the same condition, as long as I'm studying the same condition, then it would be considered a case study.
Dr. Humphrey.
Yes.
So how many people have to be in a case study to make it legitimate?
One.
Okay.
Yep. I can study one individual or I can study multiple. But as long as there's at least one with that condition of interest, then a case study is still valid. Usually if it's more than one person, it's called a multiple case study. Now, archival research is simply that. I mean, if you look at the root of it, it's archive. Anyone familiar with the Tuskegee experiment?
Yes.
Okay, share with us very quickly what that was about.
I would kind of trying to remember because I don't know if it's related to the movie Night at the Museum, but they talked about the Tuskegee Airmen. But I don't know.
No.
That was too.
No, Tuskegee Airmen was the first were the first Black pilots for the military.
Okay, then I'm confused.
Yeah. No, that's okay. The Tuskegee experiment was managed by the CDC in Tuskegee, Alabama, I think in the 30s or 40s, or 20s or 30s. And what they did was they took 20 to 30 African-American men and brought them in to participate in an experiment that they were not fully aware of what the experiment was, but they thought, well, I can make a couple of dollars. But what they did was they injected each of these men with syphilis. So they injected them with syphilis and then over their lives studied them to see what the impact would be on a human being. Now, none of the people who participated in that experiment are still alive. No, the doctors, nurses, administrators, nor the men who were injected with syphilis. So I would need to go to the archives. I would have to look at the historical data in order to figure out what the experiment was, how they conducted it, what the results were, all of those things. So that's archival research. So those are the ways that we look at research, validate it, and determine whether or not it is theoretical in nature, meaning that it advances existing research and or creates new. Okay, so that's it, guys. So thank you all. Any last questions? If you have a question, please, you can stay on. If you don't have one, then have a great day. And I will see you on Wednesday and we will start correlations.
Take care, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Take
Professor,
care.
have a good one.
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So when's the story of a childhood essay due?
I think it's around the 7th or 8th week.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the syllabus, I think I put it around the same week as when we'll be talking about chapter 8. That's
Okay.
our midpoint. Yep.
All
So
right.
you've still got time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Has anybody given you like the list of books that they want to do?
Yes. People have been sending me. Yeah, and so like I asked before, if you'll send your first, second, and third choice, then I'll respond to you through email which choice you should write about.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed our conversation. I'll have to come on earlier so we can talk some more.
I know. I really enjoy it.
Okay, you got it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, I have a question about the children's story thing.
Yeah, please.
So, I just like going through like possible options that I'm thinking of. One that came up that interests me the more I thought about it was Winnie the Pooh. Is that an option, or does it have to be more like concise stories and not like long form type stuff like that?
Well, no, and actually one person in a couple of semesters ago actually did Winnie the Pooh, so it's absolutely acceptable.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.